It's that time of year again. Everyone knows that the holidays can become overwhelming quickly, so the sooner that you get things done, the better. For both shoppers and businesses, the best time to score great deals during the holidays is Black Friday and Cyber Monday weekend. And that's why you need Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., from household names like Allbirds and Cowboy e-bikes to entrepreneurs who will be participating in their very first Black Friday or Cyber Monday this year. Shopify has everything you need to succeed from start to finish. First, Shopify's marketing tools help push your brand to the forefront of the chaos, no matter what platform your customers are on. Then, Shopify helps draw customers in with the ease of a convenient checkout with Shop Pay, Shopify's expedited checkout that saves customers information and reduces hassle. The best part? Shop Pay has been proven to boost conversions, meaning you see less abandoned carts and more profits. You can also stress less knowing that Shopify's award-winning customer support team is on standby 24/7 to help with any issues that arise, allowing you to get back to business as fast as possible. This Black Friday, join thousands of new entrepreneurs hearing for the first time with Shopify. Sign up for your free trial today at shopify.com/income. That's shopify.com/income. Go to shopify.com/income and make this Black Friday one to remember.
This is a real good story about Bronx and his dad, Ryan, real United Airlines customers.
We were returning home, and one of the flight attendants asked Bronx if he wanted to see the flight deck and meet Captain Andrew.
I got to sit in the driver's seat.
I grew up in an aviation family, and seeing Bronx kind of reminded me of myself when I was that age.
That's Andrew, a real United pilot.
These small interactions can shape a kid's future.
It felt like I was the captain.
Allowing my son to see the flight deck will stick with us forever.
That's how good leads the way.
The Presidencies of the United States is a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. As we've seen thus far in the podcast, there are certain places in the geography of the United States that have played a key role in the nation's history, and no conversation about the Revolution and early Republic is complete without talking about the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Hello and welcome to the Presidencies of the United States. I'm your host, Jerry Landry. Our guest today, Howard Gillette, plays a key role in a project that is devoted to helping us understand the greater Philadelphia region, how its growth and development impacted the nation's history, and how it continues to play a prominent role in the United States and the world. As Professor of History Emeritus at Rutgers University Camden, Howard has specialized in modern U.S. history, with a special interest in urban and regional development. Currently, he serves as co-editor of the online Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia and is a co-editor of the first volume in a 3-volume series of books entitled Greater Philadelphia, A New History for the 21st Century. Howard is the immediate past director of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Center for the Humanities, a research and advocacy organization for bringing new intellectual and monetary resources to cultural practices in the humanities as it relates to the Mid-Atlantic states of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. His work in urban history has led him to teach at such institutions as George Washington University and the University of Pennsylvania, and he is the author of numerous books about urban history and policy. I cannot thank him enough for his time and the insight that he brought in our conversation about his work on the Greater Philadelphia series. Without further ado, after this brief message, let's get to my conversation with Howard.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
Howard, thank you so much for joining us today. To get us started, I was wondering if you would mind sharing what the impetus for this project was and what did it take to get it off the ground?
Well, this started as a pretty ambitious effort to do a new history of Philadelphia, and it was the inspiration that Charlene Myers had is to do that in the form of an encyclopedia rather than a set of essays or something else. To do an encyclopedia is always very daunting because you want to be comprehensive. And to start that process, the three of us as editors formed a loose working relationship with Charlene Myers at the head of this, then at Villanova University. We pulled together a large group of local institutions and put together a workshop over a full day and got at the kinds of topics we thought ought to be included. And in the process, tried to identify people who could do that. So we did an outreach. We also went to Chicago to find out how they did the Chicago Encyclopedia, which had come out recently, and got some very good guidance from the primary director of that effort, Jim Grossman, who went on to be head of the American Historical Association. But that book, as it came out, was really a model for everything that we did in the early stages.
Excellent. And it's always good to have a model that you can build from.
Well, there had been a number, but this was also a transitional period because print encyclopedias were going out of business. At least they weren't being supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, which was the primary source for these major ones that came out in the early part of the 20th century. So we began to shift pretty quickly to thinking about this as an online encyclopedia, which is what it was over the first 10 or 13 years. And it built over time and probably has around 1,000 entries to it right now and will continue to be modified over time, although Charlene has now retired from Rutgers, where it was based, and it will be a more modest effort in terms of the online presence. But the books that we're putting out this week will help solidify that effort and also allow people to go back to the original online encyclopedia for additional information.
Well, in looking at your areas of expertise and past work, it's clear to see why this would be a great project for you to work on. So, what's motivated your academic interest in urban and regional development, and what in particular has drawn your interest into studying the greater Philadelphia region in more detail?
Well, there's a crooked path to this effort. I started in graduate school writing a dissertation on the 19th century political machine. It was all politics, and it wasn't until a few years into this process when the new social history began to emerge in Philadelphia in particular that I realized that the kinds of things I was looking at in relatively narrow terms was really based in the social and cultural life of the city as it emerged over time. That social history project focused on the mid-19th century and was very statistical in orientation, but it really was part of a larger view of what we ought to be doing in urban history particularly. So I actually made a shift in my early years towards a more broad view of the politics of cities to their physical and social components. And sooner or later, particularly in the latter part of the 20th century, with some very good work being produced by Neil Pierce in particular, began to think regionally and not just in terms of individual cities.
Well, and it's fascinating to look at it in that regional context because even though and I've seen a number of works that really focus in on the city, being able to bring in the larger region just gives you such a richer context of what's going on the ground.
Well, I think that's true. And I think, like it or not, regions are important and not always recognized as such. That is, I think there's a very good argument, and it's certainly been put forth by a number of people recently, that regions are the really critical economic engine of the United States right now. You can't just think about New York or Philadelphia. You have to think about the greater New York or Philadelphia region in terms of how it's developed. And I think that was brought out pretty seriously when Amazon put out a competition for its second national headquarters. And that was in 2017 and 18. And what they wanted was an idea of where their new workers might live. And they weren't going to live in Philadelphia alone. They were going to live in the suburbs, and that took them to Delaware, parts of New Jersey, where I live, and parts of Pennsylvania. So the irony was that three different proposals went to Amazon, one from the city, one from Camden in New Jersey, and another from Bucks County, nearby suburban area. And Philadelphia came very close to winning that competition, but it was in spite of its effort to ignore the fact that a full regional component would have reflected what they were proposing for Amazon in terms of its location and where its workers might be.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, and as the co-editor of the first volume of this series entitled The Greater Philadelphia Region, you and your colleagues you did get to that regional view, and you examined the geography of the region, both natural and man-made features, as well as some of the networks and entities that draw the region together. So, Howard, what distinguishing features have you found in the development of the Philadelphia region versus those of other urban regions in the United States?
Well, Philadelphia, like a number of other places, built around river traffic. That was a way of making it possible for the concentrated population, as it began to grow, to be provisioned. You brought provisions down both the Delaware and the Schuylkill rivers, and most cities did develop around a river. But there was also variation in how they went. Many of them were confined by their geographic boundaries. And Philadelphia was very much so in a very small, basically 6 square mile area until it expanded in 1854 to incorporate the growing suburban areas around it. So the consolidation of Philadelphia in 1854 made it a much bigger city, a city that was controlled more centrally and able to build out. So in many ways, it was typical. In many ways, certainly in the mid-19th century, was taking a bold step, followed by such places as New York and the greater consolidation at the end of the 19th century, where all the boroughs of New York were brought into a single city. But Philadelphia, I think, can be looked at as not only typical, but also normative. The way the streets were laid out and a clear grid with some park land incorporated into the city became a model for many cities. And even the names of the cities, tree names, particularly like pine and spruce, were picked up in other cities in the West. So in many ways, Philadelphia was a model for other cities, at least in the early stages, and continued to think of itself until it was surpassed in population by New York as America's first city.
Well, and as our listeners know, because we've talked about Philadelphia a good bit on the Presidency's podcast, because Philadelphia did feature very prominently in the colonial and early republic eras of American history. Would you mind speaking to how Philadelphia's role in the nation has changed over time? And what are some key insights that we can glean from studying its history?
Well, we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country, of course, and I think the timing of these publications is definitely geared to that. We probably could have continued online forever, but we thought that people coming to the city, people in the city might want to have something to refer to over time. And so, I think that in many ways, Philadelphia modeled not just the streetscape, but in the 10 years that it was the national capital, it became an institution building place. We not only had the Constitution, which of course is central to our whole history, as difficult as it is to maintain and understand just what its ramifications are at this particular point in life, but it also created the first bank and the first major kinds of other institutions that carried over to the new capital in Washington, D.C. as it took form in the year 1790 to 1800. So yes, important things were happening. Certainly Washington played a major role as the president in Philadelphia, followed by Adams. And in turn, I think his colleagues, particularly Hamilton, began to shape some of the things that carried over and were really central to the government over time. And beyond that, I would say, I've already indicated that the urban elements, how you set up a market, where you set up a market, how you take advantage of the riverways, all those kinds of things, transportation, which of course evolve over time and are documented in the book, they set a standard. And in Philadelphia, the crazy thing was to try to build a canal over the mountains. And that was in competition with New York and New York's very successful Erie Canal. But Philadelphia merchants put money into it. That was an early form of transportation, followed, of course, by other more modern forms that also had influence over time.
Absolutely. Well, and it's fascinating, I know from my research, to see for so long there were still folks that were thinking, oh, well, okay, we're moving the capital to this little place on the Potomac, but it's probably going to come back to Philly at some point. And you still see, like, even after the capital moves, you have some diplomats who are living in Philadelphia rather than going to DC. And it took a while for folks to really get this idea that the capital, no, it's really staying there. But like you said, Howard, the fact that the Bank of the United States was based in Philadelphia, and it was such a big banking presence for a long time in history, it still had that influence that it took a while for the capital, for the national capital, to actually have the influence that it did.
Well, I happened to be, for quite a long time, for 25 years or so, historian of Washington, D.C., and wrote a book about that whole history that you're talking about. And, I think that not only did Philadelphians, for their own pride, want to see the capital retained, or at least have many of the functions retained of that formative 10 years, but there was an awful lot of criticism of the early national capital. It wasn't fully developed. It was placed between two river cities, Georgetown and Alexandria, following the same logic of William Penn's location on the Schuylkill and the Delaware. But there wasn't enough money to build out the full city. So you had a very grand plan from Pierre L'Enfant and kind of scraggly fill-in, which led to many complaints from members of Congress and the like, who came and didn't want to stay in the city because it didn't have the amenities of a fleshed-out city like Philadelphia. So I could see that tension. It's not my special sphere of knowledge as to who was going back and forth and who was making those complaints, but I think they were there.
Absolutely. Well, and I think one thing you do highlight in your work, and as in the lead up to the publication of this 3-volume set, every region, every urban area faces their own challenges. And in the lead up to this publication, you wrote some blog posts about contemporary issues being faced by the greater Philadelphia region. Would you mind sharing with our listeners what some of the greatest challenges the region is facing in the 21st century, and what steps are being taken to address them?
Well, I think the region helps amplify some of the problems that we're talking about, and they're pretty easily identified. They're not specific to Philadelphia, and they're not new, but I think the period following COVID has amplified them. And one way of putting it is affordability, particularly in housing, which Philadelphia has traditionally been seen as a pretty reasonable housing market. It certainly was one of the arguments made to Amazon, but quite clearly there isn't enough affordable housing either in the city or in the nearby suburbs to accommodate people at a price that's reasonable. And so despite the fact that a great booster effort was made to convince Amazon that this was an ideal place for their workers to be, because there were so many choices, we now have a number of separate affordable housing initiatives, a major one from Mayor Marjorie Parker, but it's confined only to the city. And as successful as it might be by issuing a bond and putting a lot of money into not only new housing at a moderate and a lower level, lower income level, rehabilitation and claiming other properties that could be built upon that or be owned by the city already. A nice initiative, but one which is only going to focus on people who are able to live in Philadelphia, either with access to employment or want to be there because they have other reasons to want to be in the city. It doesn't extend out. And complementary to that, another issue I talked about and very much in the forefront is public transit. The legislature has not completed its budget this year and very much overdue. SEPTA, as the regional rail system, is underfunded anyway and borrowing basically to be able to provide basic service right now. But if it shuts down and cuts back as it is anticipated, the suburbs will suffer significantly. And because so much is happening in terms of people moving in and out of the city to work or to live, going both ways, the failure for SEPTA to be effective and fully funded, which the state legislature is, slow to do because it's a city issue and not for the rest of the state, that's going to be a real problem. So these are things that we talk in the book. We have different entries about almost every transportation system we've had, including good essays on SEPTA and its origins, and even some competing rail lines. But people don't think about this as a regional cooperation. Everybody thinks about it more as it affects them, and because jurisdictions tend to be politically distinct, it's hard to bridge those gaps. So I'd say those two things together, which are central to the well-being of day-to-day life, are very much in the forefront.
Absolutely. And I'm in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and it's interesting to see, different flavors, but some of the issues that, like you said, public transportation, we've had issues for years trying to get some of the outlying areas to agree to things like rail, trying to expand services. And it is, until you start to think about things in that regional context, everybody suffers.
I would agree. Yeah.
Well, and, turning from the challenges of the region to thinking more back to this project, and I'll say I was excited to have this opportunity to speak to you because typically when I have guests on, it's a single author of a work, and to be able to talk to somebody who worked on something that was a compilation of efforts of numerous folks, it's just fascinating to think about. And so I wanted to see, what was the most challenging aspect of working on a project like this with such a large scope and so many contributors? And conversely, what do you feel is the strength of doing a publication such as this?
Well, the challenges are quite formidable and distinct, and I think you could guess what they were right away. That, there are lots of topics that are pretty well researched, and you have people who would be willing to write them up and add to maybe the research they've already done. But there are an awful lot of topics that have not been addressed in one way or another, or have been addressed inadequately. And finding the right people and sustaining a high level of research and writing on this is difficult. And we've even a simple issue like the Civil War went through years of back and forth about how that interpretation should be and who should write the essay. And it took a long time to get there, and there are many examples of that. So, and you're working with people at every level. I mean, established scholars and at one level and many graduate students, but also freelance writers who rightfully would expect to be paid for their writing, but don't get paid for this. They will get books, and they have them in their hands now if they're published in the books. But it means that you've got to find the person, maybe do quite a bit of editing work, and there was plenty of chance to do that over time, sometimes very easy, sometimes rather difficult. The strength of it, of course, is that you can find people, particularly good people who are interested in doing this kind of work, who would do topics that wouldn't otherwise be written up in such a way. It wouldn't be done in a regular book. And that could be elements of our popular culture. It could be elements of sports history. It could be elements of all sorts of things that might not have been done before. And we were very fortunate to have found some writers who were able to spend some time writing quite a number of essays for us. Some of them were actually paid for their work because we got a few grants to do that. And that really got you a lot of information that wouldn't be available elsewhere. And I think the advantage of doing this in a peer-reviewed basis, basically, is that it's accurate. On the internet, you can find all sorts of information, but is it verified? Can it be sustained? Wikipedia is wonderful, but incomplete and uneven. We had to apply very high editorial standards, and we did. And those standards carry over to the books, which we'd be very proud about. But if you work backwards from books, which you would expect to be fully verified, the same thing that can be said for the internet part of this project. And I think that's the great value of our effort.
Definitely. Definitely. You provide a wealth of information about a city and a region that is such a large part of American history. And I love this, that it goes beyond just one focus or one topic, that you really get a sense of this is a living, breathing city, geography, people. You really get a sense from that, from having a project that takes such a large scope.
I think that's true.
Well, and speaking of, because of course, I love to travel to historic sites. Philadelphia is a city that I've been to numerous times and am looking forward to going to again. And so I was wanting to ask if our listeners, or myself, because I'll be taking notes for my next trip, if we had 24 hours on the ground in Philadelphia and the Philadelphia region, what would you recommend as an off the beaten path must see or do?
Well, I thought about that as you raised the issue originally, and I can't really say that you could go to Philadelphia and not go through the main paths through the various museums on the mall, the Parkway, and the particular elements of art and other museums that are there. The new Calder Gardens, which has just opened up, I'm yet to see. But in the last few days, because I'm preparing a teacher workshop in conjunction with the topic that I wrote about, the Schuylkill River, I went to the waterworks, the Fairmount Waterworks, for the first time ever, and I was amazed to realize that it was right behind the art museum. You can climb up from the waterworks to the art museum. It's that close, so it's not way out of the way. But I do think it's totally underappreciated. And it not only has it got wonderful views of the dam that was created to provide clean water to the city, to get the power to pump it into wooden pipes originally and later to the full city. But it has some wonderful displays inside and a terrific movie about how they actually did this, how they set the standard for the other cities around the country of getting clean water to people, which is so essential and so formidable in the city building process. So I'm going to give you a not so far out of the way, out of the box idea. And I'm sure it could be complemented very nicely by a whole number of things on Visit Philly's website, because they are very, very good about thinking about visiting a city and a region that does not confine itself just to those normative spots like Independence Hall and the African American Museum, both of which I think everyone should visit anyway. But it's there's much to do in the city and in the region.
And I can attest to that. And I always love finding new places to visit, even in a place that I've been before. Those, those places that maybe you didn't know about or have never been to, but just tell us so much. So that sounds fascinating. I would love that. Well, and Howard, as we wrap up our conversation, what do you feel is a key takeaway for readers of this 3-volume series? And what did you learn in the course of your work on this project?
Well, I learned a lot about Philadelphia I didn't ever know. That was great, and that's always a bonus when you get interested in a subject and you see how many dimensions there are to it. Listen, I think this is it has a distinct thrust to it, and I hope that people will be able to accept it and build on it. My introduction to the regional volume suggests, following from some other scholars, that communities do well when they have common knowledge of one another. That failing that, there is a tremendous amount of balkanization. And whatever we say about Philadelphia or any other metropolitan region I know is terribly fragmented in terms of the huge numbers of different jurisdictions that fall under the same sway of transportation, housing, and the issues that we talked about. Can we see each other? Can we understand each other better because we know that across the river, from either side you're coming from, or whichever river you're crossing, that there's much in common with the things that you find familiar, but which you haven't realized before. That may be an aspect of Black history, for example, or it might be an example of transportation history. People really don't work day to day in under jurisdictions that are trans town or city, and that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to see regional policies take effect and to see people come together on that. But one foundation, it seems to me, and particularly in Philadelphia, because it is a city of firsts, it is a city of great history and respect. That sense of history extends outward. And I think that if people have some greater sense of how rivers and streams, not only in Pennsylvania, but in New Jersey and Delaware, how those streams help build up a larger community, how artistic expressions began to emerge, not just in Philadelphia, but in Delaware and New Jersey. All these things will help us understand each other better. And we won't rely on the one thing that we identify that is most commonly bringing people together in the greater Philadelphia region, which is sports. Yeah, people show up in millions, thousands certainly, for the Super Bowl victory, and we have a picture of one of them for the Eagles, not the most recent one, but the one before that. And people show up, and you feel a great sense of community. That's terrific, but that isn't going to help you navigate, say, a complicated issue of where to locate your store, where you want to find the best deal for a new computer or whatever it may be. You've got to be thinking regionally to do that. And I hope that this will give a sense to people that they're welcome, and not only to be in a big region that has a great deal of diversity, but they're welcome to explore it. And when they do, they'll take away something that will help them find their place in space as well as in time.
I can't think of a better sentiment than being able to understand one another and creating a sense of belonging and community. Can't think of a better way to wrap up our conversation. Howard, I cannot thank you enough for the insight that you provided, for joining us for this episode, and for your work on this amazing project. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you, and I hope you enjoy the books.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again to Howard Gillette for his time and the insight that he provided in this discussion. Special thanks also to Kaylee with Pellion Public Relations for her work in connecting Howard and me for this interview. The 3-volume series is Greater Philadelphia, A New History for the 21st Century. I'll have links to more information on Howard's work as well as the Greater Philadelphia series on my website, presidenciespodcast.com. There you can also find past episodes of the podcast, links to more resources about all the American presidents, and information on how you, yes, you, dear listener, can help support the work of the Presidency's podcast. Special thanks to all of our patrons for their support, which helps the podcast to grow and have the equipment and resources needed for this deep dive into presidential history. If you'd like to join our patrons in supporting this work for as little as $1 per month, just go to patreon.com/presidencies to sign up. If you haven't left a rating and review yet, I hope you'll take a moment to do so, as it helps folks to know why they too should be listening to the Presidencies podcast. Thanks to all who have supported the podcast in various ways over the years. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. If you'd like to reach out to me, feel free to email me at presidenciespodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach out on social media if you don't follow me there already. I'm available on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Mastodon as Presidencies, on the formerly known as Twitter at Presidencies89, and on Instagram and Threads as Presidencies Podcast. Finally, I thank all of you for listening. Until next time, stay safe and healthy, be kind to one another, and take care, dear friends.
Kay Jewelers' early Black Friday sale is happening now. Get up to 50% off Black Friday deals and up to 40% off everything else. Don't miss this sale. Start your season with savings, only at Kay. Exclusions apply. See Kay.com/exclusions for details.
History is the greatest adventure story. But does it ever leave you wondering what the women were doing all that time? This is Lori from the Her Half of History podcast, and the answer is that some women were seizing power, or escaping slavery, or spying for their country, or creating artistic masterpieces, while countless others were doing the laundry, getting married, and wondering why their clothes don't have more pockets. If you would like to hear the stories of women doing all of those things, check out Her Half of History at herhalfofhistory.com or wherever you get your podcasts.